So in order to help this class, I have a PDF that I'm going to share in the chat. We're going to have a list of sources where you're going to be able to look and follow along a lot of what we're going to be reading together. So I'm going to put this in the chat right now. Everyone, I hope everyone can see it. Here we go. And in general, feel free to use the chat, ask any question you have, and whether it's in the middle, at the end. We're going to give time at the end, hopefully, for Q&A, for questions you can ask in audio. But even if you have a question in the middle, feel free to type it in the chat, and it will come up on my screen, and I'll be able to see the question and hopefully address it. There's a few more people are entering the class. Okay. So let's talk about first, what place does the land of Israel, how does it, where do we hold it in our consciousness as a nation, Jewish consciousness, and our life? How much has this been part of our, our identity throughout the years? So can someone just send me through the chat to confirm that they've seen the link and they are able to open it up? And it's important that you have the link open so you can follow along what we're going to read.
You get a mask on, don't be nervous.
I'll give everyone a half a minute or so to go to the chat. There I put a link to the sources that we're going to quote throughout the class. And for anyone that wants this in advance, so you can print it or whatever, please send me an email beforehand that you're looking to join the class, and I can send it to you before. Pablo, you're able to get it? You're able to see it? Amazing. Okay, so the first source we have here is from the story of Daniel, the book of Daniel and the story of Daniel, where we know that Daniel lived in the time after the destruction of the first temple. He lived in Babylon, and he was a esteemed minister, etc., advisor to the king. And the people around him were a little jealous. They didn't like the fact that this Jewish person was, up there in the government. So they conspired against him, and what they did was they convinced the Emperor Darius the Mede. That's who he was known as. He's the one that conquered the Babylonian Empire at that time, and they convinced him to make a law, a decree, that anyone that makes a request from any god, except from you, the king, for the next 30 days, should be thrown into a pit of lions. That's the term, the lion's den, being saved from the lion's den. It's from this story. So this prophet Daniel was discovered praying to Hashem despite this decree. And the king had no choice. Even though it was one of his ministers, he had to throw him into this lion's den. And we know that at the end of the story, as it says, that God sent his angel and he closed the mouths of the lions, and they did not hurt Daniel, and he was saved from the lion's den. So that's the backstory. We're going to just read here the quote where it says about him praying. So we have here, it's text number 1. We're holding page 2. So we're holding page 2 where it says text 1. We're not going to read the Hebrew. I'll read the English for you. It's like this. Upon learning that the decree had been written, Daniel went to his home, where in the upstairs room, he had to hide. In the upstairs room, there were windows open facing Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he kneeled and prayed and gave thanks to his God, just as he had done beforehand. So we're bringing the source, obviously, as you can imagine, what we're bringing the source for is the idea that he was facing Jerusalem. even though the temple was destroyed and the Jews were exiled from Israel, he made sure to remember Israel. He faced Jerusalem. And that's obviously the source. Some of you are familiar with this idea, the idea of praying 3 times a day, and definitely the idea of facing Jerusalem. This is the source for that. So much so that I know the Palmy Synagogue, it started off facing a different direction than east, but as they did the construction, when they moved things around, I think they had to work it out with the town council, etc. But they made sure that the Aron Kodesh, the Ark, would face east, face the ocean. Over here in Florida, it's very easy. You just always, wherever the ocean is, that's how you know it's east. Growing up in New York, it's very hard to tell which direction you are with all the buildings around you. So which direction is east? That's why, by the way, they have some of these apps. Like one of these Siddur prayer book apps, they also have a little link to for a compass to tell you which direction is east. The truth is that it's not always east. For some countries, it really just depends where on the map you are. For Russia, if you're in Russia, then Israel is south. Jerusalem is south, so they face south when they pray. If you're in South Africa, it would be north. And in Australia, it would be west. I remember when I spent like 4+ months in Australia in 2018, and it was a little confusing to get used to. You're not looking for east, you're not looking to pray towards east, you're looking to pray towards west. This is the source.
Yeah, this is not for me.
Hashem is everywhere, but still, so what's the idea of facing a specific direction? But obviously, we're seeing here there's a physical place, which is the epicenter of our relationship with Hashem, this land of Israel, Jerusalem, the place where the temple stood. And not only in our direction where we pray, but also in the prayer itself, we mentioned Jerusalem and where Jerusalem, that we want, the yearning for Jerusalem that we have, and how much is it part of our consciousness. So here we have text 2. We're still on page 2, text 2. This is a quote from the prayer that we say 3 times a day in the Shemona Esrei and Amidah. On Shabbat, you don't have this part of the prayer, but during the weekday, you have this is one of the 18 benedictions in the Shemona Esrei.
What is that?
And I'm going to read it for you here in English. Again, text 2, page 2.
Now, what is
for those
that?
that joined in the chat, you have a link for these sources.
4 beef nuggets, a valued prize.
So here's the blessing. Look at sound the great shofar for our freedom. Raise a banner to gather exiles and gather us from the 4 corners of the earth into our land. Blessed are you who gathers the dispersed of his people Israel. So we see not only direction where we pray, but even in the prayer itself, we mention Jerusalem.
Okay, I just think I want
one of the many blessings and prayers that we have, which are mentioning Jerusalem. Not the truth is, not only during prayer do we focus on Jerusalem, but even throughout the day. It doesn't just stay in the synagogue, but even throughout the day, we are always focusing on our homeland. And as we see here on page 3, text 3a, this is something where before we bench, before the grace after meals, you know what I'm benching. So there's a certain paragraph we say before that, before we do the official benching, the official grace after meals. And in this, we're going to read soon how it mentions how we can never forget about Israel. And I'll just give you the backstory to this specific Psalm 137 is that it's referring to the Levites in the time of when the Jews were expelled from Israel, and the Babylonians were trying to convince the Levites, the people that were the Jews that served in the temple, to perform whatever service they did in the temple, to perform that service for them, which for the Levites that was singing and playing music that they did in the temple. So they were being demanded to perform these services, songs, music, etc. in Babylon. And this is what they said. I'm going to read again. I'm reading text 3a on page 3. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept as we remembered Zion. We hung our harps on willows in its midst. For there our captors asked us asked of us to sing songs. Our tormentors insisted on joyful tunes. Sing for us of the songs of Zion, they demanded. But how can we sing the song of God on foreign soil? And this is a famous line that a lot of us must have heard before. In English, if I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cleave to my palate if I do not remember you, if I do not recall Jerusalem at the height of my joy. And this is something that's said before the grace after meals, every time we eat bread. Now on Shabbat, we don't mourn. So this is a more of a sad, mournful, the past one was more of a sad, mournful psalm. So on Shabbat, we read from Psalm 126. And if you come to synagogue, this is always the beginning of the benching that the rabbi will sing out loud. But it has the same idea, it's just not in a mournful way. I'll read it in English. We're holding text 3b on page 4. A song of ascents. When God returns the returnees of Zion, we will have been like dreamers. Our mouths will then be filled with laughter and our tongues with song. They will then say among the nations, God has done amazing things for this nation.
Hello?
Now, it doesn't stop there. It's not only before the grace after meals, but in the grace after meals, we also mention our longing for Jerusalem and the land of Israel. Now we're holding page 5, text 3c. It says, I'm going to read in English what we say in the benching, in the grace after meals, whenever we have. Our God, have compassion on your people Israel, on your city Jerusalem, on Zion, the dwelling place of your glory, on the kingship of the house of David, your anointed one, and on the great and holy house upon which your name is called. Rebuild Jerusalem, the holy city, speedily nowadays. That's the part, build Jerusalem. That is what we're saying when we do the bench, we do the grace after meals. Yeah, we know that remembering Jerusalem is not limited to this. Every event, almost every event in Judaism has this idea of remembering Yerushalayim, remembering Jerusalem and the land of Israel. You know, by a wedding, we break the glass. By the chuppah, one of the most joyous events in a Jewish lifetime, we always make sure that we break the glass to remember Jerusalem. Also, on the opposite extreme, when we're doing a shiva call, the words that we commonly use to comfort the mourners is the words "Hamakim yinachem eschem b'seich shar avalei tzion Yerushalayim." That may God comfort you, just like the mourners of Zion in Yerushalayim. So we see again that in all aspects of Jewish life, we really always have this longing, and we're always conscious of the land of Israel. And therefore, throughout history, there's been many times where Jews have actually made the trip, not only prayed about it, thought about it, longed for it, cried to be back in Israel, but they actually made that treacherous long trip all the way back to the land of Israel. If you look, you have it here on the next page, after page 5, you have a timeline. We're not going to go through all of them, but you have a timeline of different times that Jews have made it back to the land of Israel. I'm just going to point out some of them that I took note of. So if you go, you see here in 1141, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, he arrived in the land of Israel. Now I'm pointing that out just because we will talk about him soon, so I want to point that out. And we'll talk about who he was. You see in 1165, it says, fleeing religious persecution in North Africa, Maimonides, the Rambam, he arrived in the land of Israel. He lived in Israel for a short time, but then after a few months, he had to settle in Egypt. When he passed away, his body was brought to Israel, and he's buried in Tiberias in Tveria, which you can go there today, and you'll see a big gravesite for Maimonides. In 1173, there's a person named Benjamin of Tudela. In Hebrew, it's said as Binyamin Mitudela. Now, for me, this sticks out just because I I had a great aunt, my great grandmother's sister, the great grandmother that we actually named our daughter after, and I'm named after her husband. Um, so she had a sister who was younger than her, my great aunt, and she actually just passed away last year, and she was single her whole life, and at some point in her younger years she made aliyah to Israel and lived in Israel ever since. And she had an apartment in Jerusalem, and whenever we would go to Israel, anyone in our family, I would want to make sure to go visit her and maybe even stay by her. And she lived on a street called Binyamin Mitudela. And I always was curious, like, well, it's an interesting name. I never heard of this person. What is that? And we're going to read, like you read here, Binyamin of Tudela, he visited the Holy Land, and he was the one that authored a report of how the state of the Jewish people in in the land of Israel in the year 1173. So it's a long time ago, and he's the one that we have that decided to make that trip and also document it. Therefore, a lot of information that we have is from his I guess you want to call it his diary or whatever term you want to use for it. In the back of this PDF that I posted on the chat, you can read a full, not the full report, but you can read a significant amount of what he writes about what was going on in the land of Israel when he arrived there in 1173. You have another one here, 1211. There's an aliyah of Tosafos. We know that in the Talmud there's many commentaries. One of the most famous ones is Rashi, which we'll mention him soon. But there's also the Tosafos. They're on the other side. They're on the actual page of the Talmud, on the other side. Rashi's on the inner part of the page, and the Tosafos are on the outer part of the page. Now, a lot of them made aliyah to Israel following an expulsion of the Crusaders, and so they were invited to settle in the Holy Land. A large group of English and French and German Jews arrived in the land of Israel, including 300 Talmudic scholars. They're just giving you pointing out a few different examples of when Jews made aliyah, but you have a full timeline here. One more recent I want to point out. In 1881, you have on the next page, 1881, there was a Yemenite aliyah, Jews from Yemen. Now we know the Jewish community of Yemen has been there literally for thousands of years. They moved from they were from Israel, they moved to Yemen, and they never left. So a lot of traditions that they have are, in a certain sense, more authentic than some of them that we have. Now, in 1881, a lot of them decided they were going to travel to Israel. And it says that they literally walked. A lot of them walked from Yemen all the way to Israel through the desert just to be able to live in the land of Israel. Just as a sequel to that, in 1949, 1950, you see here, it says nearly 50,000 Yemenite Jews were airlifted to Israel in an operation called Operation Magic Carpet, which was ran by the new state of Israel. Now, so something interesting about that. I remember hearing that the Yemenites, they lived in a very poor conditions. They didn't really know a lot of the advances that were going on in the world at that time. So when they saw planes, they thought, "Oh, this is the times of Messiah," because it's known that when the Jews there's a certain verse that says when the Jews will go back to Israel, the times of the Messiah will be in Hebrew we say al kanfei nesharim, on the wings of eagles. So when they saw airplanes, they were like, this is the wings of eagles that the prophecy talks about them going into the land of Israel. This must be it, because they never saw a plane before. They never even imagined of such. So they thought for sure that this is what these planes are. Okay. We even know that it's so much part of our Jewish heritage and consciousness that after the Seder, after the Seder on Passover, what do we say? Shana haba b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. And there's another time in the year that we do this. Maybe not remember it so much because we're so hungry and everyone's thinking about the food and rushing out of shul. But right after, at the end of Yom Kippur, right after the shofar blast, when everyone's running out, that's what everyone announces Lashana Haba Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. So they're just again bringing out the point that the land of Israel, even though we've been over 1,800 years exiled from the land of Israel, but it's still it's been so much part of our psyche and our Jewish identity. Here I'm going to, on page 8, we have a quote from Maimonides, which shows how much people are always longing for the land of Israel. We'll see at the end that even if they weren't able to make it to Israel while they were alive, at least they wanted to be buried in the land of Israel. And that's actually Maimonides himself. Like I said, he mentioned he lived in Egypt at the end of his lifetime. He was a doctor for the Sultan there, etc. But eventually, when he passed away, he wanted to be buried in Israel. And there's a whole story how he ended up being buried in Tveria, near the Sea of Galilee, near the Kinneret. So we'll read this here, text 4 on page 8. He writes, "The great sages would kiss the boundaries of the land of Israel upon arrival, kiss its stones and roll in its dust. Indeed, it is written, your servants cherish her stones and favor her dust." Although one cannot compare being received by the Holy Land during one's lifetime to being received by after one's death, nevertheless, the greatest sages would bring their dead to be buried in the Holy Land, as can be learned from the example of our father Jacob and the righteous Joseph. We know we're going to read soon throughout the coming parshas that Jacob wanted to be buried in the land of Israel. Joseph wanted to be buried in the land of Israel, and they asked their children to make sure that they were carried and buried in the land of Israel specifically. Now, I heard it as a statistic, but there's more American Jews that emigrate to Israel after their life than during their lifetime. Meaning, a lot of American Jews, even though they never make Aliyah to Israel during their lifetime, they want to be buried specifically in the land of Israel. There's a story of an old woman that wanted to board a El Al flight to Israel. Besides a little bag and a purse that she had, she also was carrying a little dog in a box. The ticket agent says, "I'm sorry, you can't take this dog on the flight. You'll have to check it in, put it with your baggage." She has no options. So the woman agrees. Then when the plane arrives in Ben Gurion reports, the baggage was unloaded, and to the horror of the people handling the baggage, they see that this dog is dead. So they're like, they got another dog quickly, same exact dog, same breed, same markings, so they can replace the dog that died. The old woman would never know. That was their plan. The woman goes to the baggage counter and she goes to get her box, and they bring her the box with this new dog. And she says, "No, this is not my dog." So they're like, "What do you mean? Of course it's your dog. Why would you think it's not your dog?" So the woman says, "My dog is dead. I came to bury it in the Holy Land." Which is obviously is a joke, but it's trying to bring out the point that people are very much want to be at least buried, want some sort of connection with the land of Israel. Here on page 9, we have a text from someone named Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, which he was. You can see here on the side. Every person that we're quoting here, it has their little short bio. So he lived in 1075, and like we mentioned, at the end of his lifetime, he actually was able to make it to the land of Israel. And that year that he made it to Israel, he finally made it after his whole lifetime. He actually passed away very soon after, but at least he made it. He's most known for the book called the Kuzari, which is a very interesting book where it's not, there's different opinions if it actually happened in a historical way, or is it just him writing as if it happened. But the way the book is written is that it's a discussion between a Jew, a Christian, and a Muslim in front of a king of the land called Kuzar. And it's a little back and forth and a bunch of questions that they ask each other and the answer that the Jew gives, which is a beautiful book, a very interesting book about Jewish philosophy and thought. And we're actually going to quote some of it later in this class. Now, here's a quote of one of the poems that he wrote. He was known for writing poems, and this is one of the poems that we have today. It goes like this. Again, we're holding page 9. We're reading text 5. My heart is in the east, and I am at the ends of the west. How can I taste what I eat, and how can it be savory? How shall I render my vows and my bonds while Zion is yet in the fetters of Rome, and I am still in the shackles of Arabia? It shall be as easy for me to forsake all the bounty of Spain as it is precious for me to behold the dust of the desolate abode. Showing again that throughout history, Jews have been longing for this land of Israel. Now, we're going to discuss what claims the Jewish people have to this land of Israel. So there's 3 general claims that you'll find throughout that people will give, and they're actually find all these 3. We're going to quote from the Declaration of Independence, how we see that these are the claims that we use for the land of Israel. But the reason why it's important to discuss this is because it's very easy, based on the climate and the world that we live in today, where they're all questioning the legitimacy of the land of Israel. It's very easy to start doubting ourselves. There's even happened in 2002 during the Second Intifada, and Ariel Sharon, the Prime Minister, launched Operation Defense Shield, finally fighting back against these Palestinian terrorists. And we all remember, even I was very young at that time, but I remember this, how the international community really condemned Israel for everything they were doing at that time. And just to quote the UN Secretary General at that time, his name was Kofi Annan. He said like this. This brings out the attitude of the world at that time. This is what he said. Can Israel be right and the whole world be wrong? And this is at a time when the state of Israel is trying to fight terrorism, and this is what was being said. So it's very based on and we see this on campuses, etc., the environment against the legitimacy of the land of Israel, state of Israel. And sometimes it can even lead to Jewish students or others to doubt themselves about about our claim to the land of Israel. So it's very important to go over what exactly is the land of Israel. And we're going to split it up into 3 separate claims. The first claim is the historical argument. The second one is an international law argument, and the third one is about Jewish survival. So let's go through them. Here we have on page 10, we have a quote from a book called Maccabees. Now it's interesting. Growing up, I didn't know about this book, but and if you look at it says Maccabees 15:30, chapter 15, verse 33, 34. Like, oh, one second, which one of the books of the Bible of the Tanakh is the Maccabees? I never heard of this one. And the truth is that it was written as if it was a book from the Bible, but the truth is that it's not. It's not a book of prophecy. It's just who exactly wrote it or not. It's not clear. You can read on the side here who we think it is, but they say it was probably a Jewish person, but it was written originally in Greek. But it's still something that it will even be quoted in Jewish sources. This book of Maccabees, and it talks about the time before and after the Hanukkah story, where the Maccabees were featured. And in this specific story, there was one of the 5 sons of Mattisyahu, the brother of Yehuda, Judah the Maccabee. He had a brother, Simon, Shimon, and he was the leader of the Jewish people at that time. He was the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and he was also the king, the leader for the Jewish nation that was living in the land of Israel. And there were different Greek rulers that are fighting with each other, not to get into the whole history, but he was given permission to lead an autonomous state in the autonomous nation in Israel, and he was given permission to even he was allowed to take over and a few cities in the historical land of Israel. But as the king, the emperor that allowed him to do it was finish his side wars that he had going on, he turned his attention towards Shimon and kind of backstabbed him and said, "Oh no, now's the time you have to pay all the taxes you collected from those cities up until this time." In other words, saying that the land of Israel is not really the Jewish people, is not really yours, and it really belongs to you. This person's name was Antiochus, but it was a different Antiochus. So here's what Shimon, the brother of Judah the Maccabee, this is what he answered. He answered like this. So Simon answered, I'm reading again text 6 on page 10. Simon answered Antiochus' messenger and said to him, it is not a foreign land that we have conquered, neither is it the possession of others over which we rule. It is the heritage of our ancestors, which was from the time, for some time unjustly conquered, which we, upon obtaining the power to do so, have restored to ourselves. So you have no right to tell us what we should be able to live in this land or not. We should be able to control this land or not. We know Jews have been living in the land of Israel for the longest of time. There's actually in the Diaspora Museum in Israel, they have a photo of a family that's been living in Israel since the times of the first temple. They were living in a certain village in the sea, in the Galilee area, near the Sea of Galilee. Here we call it the Galil. And they actually have a photo of this family that's been living there since the times of the first temple. And if you on page 11, you have your timeline of from when Abraham arrived in the land, which is actually this week's parsha. That's part of why it's appropriate to be doing this course in this time of the year. We're kind of walking through the land of Israel with the patriarchs, starting with this week's parsha, this week's Torah portion, where God tells Abraham, "Lech lecha, go, travel, leave your homeland, go to a land that I will show you," without even telling him where that is, and which the Torah says later was the land of Israel, which was known as the land of Canaan at that time. So here you have, again, on page 11, you just have a timeline of how long the Jews have been in the land of Israel. And what this shows us is, again, the Jews have a historical connection to this specific piece of land. And this we can see in the Declaration of Independence of the land in 1948, when the United Nations finally allowed Israel to be a state, to be a country. This is what they wrote in the Declaration of Independence. So here we're on page 12, text 7a. The land of Israel was the birthplace of the Jewish people. Here their spiritual, religious, and political identity was shaped. Here they first attained statehood, created cultural values of national and universal significance, and gave to the world the eternal book of books. After being forcibly exiled from their land, the people kept faith with it throughout their dispersion and never ceased to pray and hope for their return to it, and for the restoration in it of their political freedom. In 1897, at the summons of the spiritual father of the Jewish state, Theodor Herzl, the first Zionist Congress convened and proclaimed the right of the Jewish people to national rebirth in its own country. So we see, again, we're using the Declaration of Independence to show the arguments that the founders of Israel used when they created the state of Israel. And what we see here is this idea, again, of saying we have a historical connection. We've been in Israel all this time. Now, the truth is that even such a claim has some, I don't want to call it flaws, but there's definitely what people answer to such claims. So there's certain things that you could say. For example, some people will say, "Oh, just because you lived in the land 2,000 years ago, now you can come and take it back. Maybe the Greeks should be able to take the land of Egypt back because they were there before the Romans, were there before the Muslims. Maybe the Native Americans should be able to take New York back." Yeah, again, we're not saying that these claims are actually valid, but you can have people which seemingly which people do say such things. Another thing that people can say is that, what about the people? We know that the Jewish people, they didn't live in Israel the whole time. It says we know it's said in the Bible, in the Torah, that Joshua, right after Moses died, Joshua led the Jews into Israel and conquered the land of Israel. So let's theoretically, let's say the people that were living there before, Israel was known as the land of Canaan before that. Imagine they would come back. Now they would, they would show up at our door tomorrow. They would claim the land. Would we have to give it back to them? So if you use a historical precedent, if you say that just from a historical point that the Jews have lived there in history, that's something that could be a little shaky. Not saying that these are valid points, especially because we've always had Jewish people living there throughout history, but you definitely have people that will knock it. Let's move to the second claim that we have to the land of Israel, more from a law, as a lawful claim. Now we know that Jews are great lawyers. So when they established the state of Israel, they made sure that it should fit according to international law. So just to give over a brief history of how how the state of Israel came to be from the sequence of events. So we all know that in 1917, it was on November 2nd, that James Balfour, Lord James Balfour, he was the British Foreign Secretary at the time. He sent a letter to Baron Walter Rothschild to give to the Zionist Federation of Great Britain and Ireland, which he said like this. He said, His Majesty's government view with His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. And this is known as the Balfour Declaration. And this wasn't just a letter, but it was actually incorporated in the British Mandate for Palestine, which happened in July 24, 1922. This was after World War I, where after hundreds of years, where the land of Israel was part of the Ottoman Empire. During World War I, the Ottomans joined the Germans, and we know that the Germans, that side, lost the war, and the Ottoman Empire ceased to exist. It was dissolved, and the League of Nations was created then, and they gave different mandates to different countries to set up new countries in the fragmented Ottoman Empire. And the British, they were the ones that were entrusted to take care of. They have the mandate of Palestine, and the idea was to create a homeland for the Jewish people. Now, the truth is that in the British, they kind of took back a little bit from this commitment that they made, something called the White Papers. And what would happen from this was 77% of this mandate of Palestine that was supposed to be given to the Jewish people was turned into the Kingdom of Jordan, of Transjordan, which is on the east bank of the Jordan River. You can see how big the country of Jordan is, and that was really all supposed to be given to the Jewish people. But the British reneged on what they promised to do. Now, let's read here let's read here the quote from the Declaration of Independence from 1948. Here we're holding text 7b on page 13. So like this: this right was recognized in the Balfour Declaration of the 2nd of November 1917, and reaffirmed in the mandate of the League of Nations, which in particular gave international sanction to the historic connection between the Jewish people and the land of Israel, and to the right of the Jewish people to rebuild its national home. On the 29th of November 1947, the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution calling for the establishment of a Jewish state in the land of Israel. The General Assembly required inhabitants of the land of Israel to take such steps as were necessary on their part for the implementation of that resolution. This recognition by the United Nations of the right of the Jewish people to establish their state is irrevocable. So there was a whole buildup until the state of Israel was created, all from a lawful. There were tons of nations that, when the Jews declared independence, that acknowledged the state of Israel. Just to give the numbers, here are the 56 nations that were members of the UN at the time for the partition. So they vote. 33 countries voted for the partition plan, 13 voted against it, and 10, it says, abstained at that time. but it did pass, and that was the resolution. So seemingly international law agreed, not only agreed, but actually itself established the state of Israel. But even this has some again, things that people can try to claim that maybe it's not so true, it's not so proper. And the main point really is that if we're going to take our legitimacy for the state of Israel from the UN resolution, then let's say the UN for whatever reason decides to make a new resolution all of a sudden, then all that legitimacy goes away. So we can't let our legitimacy depend on recognition from the UN or from the other nations of the world. And the last one, which is one of the more simple, clear reasons why we need a nation of Israel is for Jewish survival. Unfortunately, there's too many to mention episodes where Jews were persecuted just for being Jewish. And if they had a Jewish homeland, then they would have a place to go. They would be able to flee persecution. And obviously, the most extreme occurrence of this was the Holocaust, where many Jews tried to emigrate to the land of Israel and were turned away. Not only turned away from running away to America or other countries, but even turned away from the land of Israel itself. As you have here on page 14, text 7c, the quote from the Declaration of Independence, 1948, right here in a short paragraph. The catastrophe which recently befell the Jewish people, the massacre of millions of Jews in Europe, was another clear demonstration of the urgency of solving the problem of its homelessness by reestablishing it in the land of Israel, the Jewish state, which would open the gates of the homeland wide to every Jew and confer upon the Jewish people the status of a fully privileged member of the community of nations. But even to this, there's, people will say, oh, so why does it have to be the land of Israel? There's even something interesting that some people wrote up a plan that it was called the Uganda proposal. In the early 1900s, they offered to give part of East Africa, which the British were in charge of then, to give that for the Jewish people as the homeland. And some people actually accepted this plan, but thank God it didn't happen. But people could say, oh, why if the Jews need a land for their nation so they can survive, for their survival, it can be anywhere. It doesn't have to be in this specific land. You also say maybe Jews aren't even as safe being in Israel. Unfortunately, there's a lot of terrorism that's happening. There's Iran threatening nuclear. I don't want to talk about it, God forbid. But the fact that we're all in the state of Israel, we're under this threat from Iran. The fact that many Jews live there. Okay, and then we know the worst. One of the counterclaims here is the fact that Arabs will like to say, "Oh, why do we have to pay the price for European murder of the Jews?" And that's why we don't want to rely on any one of these three claims. Again, whether it's historically that belongs to us, or whether it's for our survival, or whether we have a lawful claim to the land of Israel. The claim that we're going to want to focus on, which is something that can never be, that is at least for us to know that it's unshakable and it's 100% true, is from the fact that the Torah mentions that God gave us the land of Israel. Now we're going to bring this out through here on page 15. You have text 8, a quote from Rashi. Now this is the first Rashi in the entire Torah. Rashi is the main commentary that everyone, whenever you want to understand a certain verse of the Torah, you'll always look to Rashi. He gives you the simple, straightforward explanation. Whether you're a 5-year-old or an 80-year-old, you always look to Rashi. And the first Rashi on the Torah, after right where it mentions that in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, Rashi writes like this. He asks a question. Seemingly the Torah should have begun in a different place. Now, I guess I'll explain it outside as we're run out of time. So, and you have it here to read for later. Rashi asks the question. The Torah starts off with God created the heavens and the earth. Now that's just a story. God, okay, very nice. And it goes to the story of Abraham, etc. But if someone asks you what is the Torah, you would say the Torah is a book of law, the book of the mitzvahs, how we know what to do, how we should live our life. So Rashi was asking here, why does the Torah start off with God creating the world? Why is that relevant to the mitzvahs that we need to know what to do? The Torah should have just started from the first mitzvah, what is the first mitzvah? It's the mitzvah of keeping a Jewish calendar. We won't get into that, but that is the first mitzvah. That's really where the Torah should have started from. Why does it start from God creating the heavens and earth? And Rashi answers that like this. If the nations of the world will say to Israel, you are thieves for having conquered the lands of the seven nations. So Israel will reply, the entire world is God's. He created it and granted it to whomever he desired. It was his will to give the seven nations, meaning this, to give it to the seven nations, and it was his will to take it from them and give it to us. So the strongest claim we have to the land of Israel is the fact that God gave it to us. And that's why the Torah writes the beginning verses of the Torah telling us how that God created the world is to tell us that God created the world and therefore he can give any specific piece of land to any specific nation. And he gave us the land of Israel. But it's not only the first few verses that tell us this. If you really look throughout this week's parsha, starting in this parsha and going through all the way through the Exodus, it always talks about how God promised the land of Israel to the Jewish nation. You have it starting in this week's parsha with Abraham, where God said, go pick up, go leave from where you live and go to the land of Israel. And he ended up in the land of Israel and he promised him that land. He promised his son, Isaac, that he's going to be the one that's going to inherit this land, not his brother Ishmael. Same thing with Jacob, not Esau. And then throughout the whole Exodus, it mentions how the goal was to get to the land of Israel. Now, why is this so important? Why is this idea of having a land of Israel so integral to the Jewish story, to have a specific land? So we have a quote here on page 16, where this is something very, very interesting. And when I saw this for the first time a few years ago when I was studying in Brooklyn, I was very surprised to read this. It's written by Nachmanides. Which you have his bio. You have his bio here on the side if you want to read more about his life. And he writes like this. They're holding page 16, text 9. The sages of the Talmud declared, anyone who lives outside the land is comparable to one who has no God, which is very extreme. Again, anyone that lives outside the land of Israel is comparable to someone who has no God. And he brings a verse for this. To give you the land of Canaan to be a God for you. I mean, when you're in the land of Canaan, that's when Hashem is a God for you. For all the mitzvahs of the Torah were given primarily to be fulfilled by those who dwell in the land of God. In other words, he says mitzvahs are primarily supposed to be done in the land of Israel. That's the main place where all this should happen. And by the way, there are many, many mitzvahs in the Torah that can't be performed today and can't be performed outside of Israel. Here you have a picture of one of the mitzvahs is bringing the first fruits to the temple. A lot of other mitzvahs, agriculture or other sacrifices, temple, a lot of these things only apply in the land of Israel. So what we see here is that the ideal fulfillment of the Jewish mission in history is specifically in this land of Israel. And the idea, to sum it up before we run out of time, is that people can think seemingly, the Jewish people were more people of the book. Einstein even said he wasn't not necessarily against the establishment of the land of Israel, the state of Israel, but he expressed that Jewish people are known for their what they contributed to the moral values of the world. All the Abrahamic religions come specifically from the Jewish people. We're a light unto the nations. Christianity, Islam is all based on Judaism. So we're known as people of the book. We're more like, in a certain sense, we're more like heaven people, more spiritual people. What's this whole idea of having a specific piece of land, an actual piece of land connected to that, spiritual mission? It's something that it's hard to see put together. The truth is that's really what God's mission for us, and for what the Jewish mission is really this idea. Yes, we are more spiritual people. We are more about contributing to morality and other things in sciences. Look at all the Nobel Prizes that were given to Jewish people. But the goal is to bring, bring heaven, bring heaven down to earth. God shouldn't just be a God of the heavens, but even in this mundane world, even in a piece of land, we should live and create a proper, just society. And that is the real goal of the land of Israel. That's the whole idea of why that, even though we're just a religion of laws, but there's also we need a society. God wants a society with a land where we establish a proper country, fulfilling everything that God says. So to sum it up, and here you have in the rest of the PDF that I put up, you can read here different different quotes from different speeches, etc., which bring out this point. And like I mentioned in the Kuzari, I wanted to get to this. He talks about how they're asking, what about this? What's this land of Israel shtick, so to speak? And he says, just like there are certain lands that are better for growing grapes, and certain lands that are better for growing figs. So Israel is a land which is the best place for the Jewish mission, for the fulfillment, like we read, the fulfillment of mitzvahs and what God really wants from us, his children. And the best place, the best land to fulfill this is the land of Israel. So, again, what we're trying to say here is, first of all, our claim to the land of Israel is, yes, we have a historical claim, a lawful claim. We need it for our survival. But at the end of the day, we want for everyone can always try to poke holes in all of this. But we need to know that the reason why the land of Israel belongs to us is because God gave it to us, and He has a mission for us to live in a mundane land, a physical land, not just to be spiritual, academic people, but to be people of the book, but actually to set up a proper, just society in a physical land, and that is the goal for this mission. And also, just a random interesting fact is that, think about it, at that time, Israel was the center of the world. There's Europe and Asia, and then there was Africa. Those are the two main land masses, and the way to travel from one to the other, besides going by boat, was through the land of Israel. And you can say that part of that idea was that they would pass through the Jewish people and see and learn from how the Jews have a just, proper society following the law of Hashem in this country. Again, you have more reading material if you want to read up on it. It has some summaries, you can read here. They have at the end here about all the different purchases that the Jewish people have made in Israel to solidify our claim to the land. That's all for the reading. And the main idea again is how we've been dreaming to be back in the land of Israel all this time. Like we mentioned, we always face Jerusalem when we pray. And a lot of different times that we mention in our prayer, we don't even by our weddings, mourning, etc. And why is it so integral? Because this is the land of Israel is the place where it's the most natural for a Jewish person to live his Judaism. It's in the land of Israel. Now I want to give some time for anyone that has any questions on anything we said. Please, if you disagree with anything we said, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions that you might have. Okay, amazing. I'll take that as a compliment that everything was clear. Yes, thank you, Gloria. I appreciate the feedback. This is the first of a series. Next class, we're going to be talking about the idea of a preemptive strike. During the 6-Day War, 1967, we had to defend ourselves. But the state of Israel launched the offensive first, and people were very upset about that. So we'll talk about that topic in the next class. Amazing. Thank you all for joining. Looking forward to seeing you, whether it's in Shul or on another class on Zoom sometime soon. All righty. Everyone have a good night.